Hello, bonjour, it's Laura here. In this video, I'm going to talk about chemical reactions and what you can't see. So in the last video, we talked about the signs, the physical signs that you could use to tell whether a chemical reaction had taken place. Now we're going to talk about what's going on behind the scenes. So in a chemical reaction, bonds are formed or broken. So bonds in a molecule are broken and then new bonds are formed. So I've got a couple of examples here that we can look at. So for example, I've got a molecule here, AB. So this isn't really any molecule that we know, but you can see that there's a bond here between the A and the B. These aren't real elements, this is just hypothetical. So then this arrow shows that a reaction is taking place, and then what's happened is that bond is broken and the A is now by itself and the B is now by itself. So the bond has been broken there. So that is a chemical reaction. So here is a second one. We've got A by itself, B by itself, then a reaction takes place and a bond is actually formed here. So the A and the B have joined together. So that is another example of a chemical reaction. Now, if you were looking at that, you wouldn't be able to see that the bonds had been formed. What you would see is something else, like a color change, for example. Here's another example of a chemical reaction. So here we've got a molecule between A and B. There's a bond, and then C is floating around by itself. Now what happens is a new bond forms here. So the bond between A and B breaks, and then a new bond forms between A and C, and then B is by itself. So here is another example of a chemical reaction. Those bonds have been broken and then new ones have been formed. Here's a fourth example. Here we've got two molecules, they're reacting, and we've got bonds here. So these bonds, like the bond between A and B, that's going to break. Also the bond between C and D, that's going to break. And then what happens is they all rearrange, and the A and the C actually form a bond, and then the B and the D. So they've essentially switched places or switched partners here. So that's another example of a chemical reaction. So that's what's happening with the molecules. As chemists, we need to be able to talk about what is happening. And so what we do is we write chemical equations, and these equations are a way for us to represent what's happening in a reaction. So for example here, this is a picture of some charcoal on a grill, so it's burning, and so that would be on your barbecue or something like that. Now what's happening is we've got carbon here mixing with the oxygen gas, and then it's producing carbon dioxide. So we observe that's happening, and then we want to be able to write it out so we can talk about it with other people or other chemists. So what we've got right here is what's called a chemical equation. And what we do is we take the formula for each of the compounds or atoms or elements, and we write them out. So here we've got carbon, and this plus sign means that we're mixing it with the oxygen gas here, and then the reaction happens and we're left with carbon dioxide. Okay, so you can see from these molecules that things have been broken, bonds have been broken, new bonds have been formed, and this is how we would represent it, because we can't always draw pictures like this in our research reports. Okay, so in a chemical reaction, what you want to do is you want to take the reactants, these are like the ingredients, and you write them on the left. These are what we're starting with, and then what we end with is our products. So they would be written on the right. Then we put our arrow that says that this reaction has happened. And then you'll also notice these letters in brackets here. So when we put brackets beside the formula for the compound or the element, that's actually saying what state it's in. So this is carbon, and it is a solid. So that S means solid. The G means gas. And then the next G beside the carbon dioxide, that's also gas. So there's other symbols that you can use, and I'll show you that on the next slide. Now, if you ever have a triangle above the arrow, that means that heat was needed to get that reaction started. So when you think about a barbecue, you usually need to like light a match or press a button to get some type of ignition happening, and that gets the reaction going. So that's what that triangle means. So here's a summary of the symbols that you could see in a chemical reaction. So we talked about the plus and the arrow. Now, if you have a liquid, you would use the symbol L. And then aqueous. If something is aqueous, that means it's in water and it's dissolved. So say I have like table salt, which is NaCl. If I wrote AQ beside that, that means that salt is aqueous. It's dissolved in water. And then that's how the reaction, like the state that it's in when it's in the reaction. So let's go through reactions that we talked about with those demos that we just did. So the first demo, so this was in the previous video, I showed you a tarnished silver platter. So this is what the reaction would look like. So here we've got our arrow showing that we've got a reaction. We've got all of the compounds that take part in the reaction. So these are the reactants on the left. These would be our products on the right. And then you can see that I've got states here. So we've got the silver was a solid, the hydrogen sulfide was a gas, the oxygen is a gas, the tarnish that we're left with, that's the silver sulfide, that is a solid, so that's that black stuff that's on the platter. And then liquid water was formed as well. Now in the next one, you can see that's where we had sodium bicarbonate, the baking soda, reacting with the acetic acid, the vinegar. And then it was producing sodium acetate, water, and carbon dioxide. So again, we've got our reactants on the left, our products on the right, and we're showing all of our states. So that's another example of a chemical reaction. And notice in both of them we've got our arrows and we've got our pluses between the formulas for the compounds. Now you'll notice in that first chemical reaction there were some numbers written in front of the compounds. And we're going to talk about that in our next video. Okay, so after this video, you should be able to understand the parts of a chemical reaction. So well done, Miigwech.